Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born.
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
Have you ever run across something and thought to yourself, how is it possible that I missed this my whole life? Give you a perfect example. I love rap music. I love hip-hop. I grew up on it. Like a lot of sort of privileged upper-middle-class suburbanite white kids that grew up in the suburbs in reasonably fortunate circumstances, I grew up with the mistaken impression that I was down. I was not down, but I enjoyed writing graffiti and then driving away at top speed in my mother's Volvo. And so for that reason, I was a bit of a student of hip-hop music. Still am, but of a certain era and a certain type of hip-hop music, I suppose. Some people call it backpacker hip-hop now. Some people call it old-school hip-hop. Some people call it boom-bap hip-hop, whatever you want to call it. Sort of, I guess, older-sounding rap music. Now, there's a couple of groups that have come out in more recent years that make music that sort of stays true to the ethics of writing compelling and clever lyrics and composing unbelievable music to go with those lyrics, that inspire those lyrics. And I'm a big fan of that sort of thing, probably because, give me an O, give me an L, give me a D. I enjoy the type of hip hop now that I enjoyed when I was a whippersnapper. So if someone comes out and makes a record that sounds like a record sounded in 1992 to 1995, the golden age of hip hop, then I'm going to be really interested in it. And so I'm standing in a sandwich shop the other day, and I hear this music. I was like, this is fantastic. Oh man, this is great. I've never heard it before. This must be new, but it sounds like it could have been made when I was a kid. This adheres to all the same principles that rigidly defined hip hop back in the day: clever instrumentation and even cleverer lyrics. And I said to the guy at the sandwich shop, I'm like, who is this? He's like, oh, this is People Under the Stairs. I was like, yeah, don't know them. Are they new? He's like, are you kidding me, dude? They're really old. This came out in like 1992. And one thing I've come to realize, I spend more and more time in California these days because of some of the work that I do on the West Coast. One thing I've come to realize is there really was an East Coast, West Coast divide when it came to hip hop, not just in terms of the rivalry of the rappers, but, there was, it was sort of a regionally successful thing in much the same way that hip hop in the South is a regionally successful thing. Paul Wall, Houston rapper extraordinaire, had a #1 album, and I think the vast majority of those copies were sold in the state of Texas. And the same could be said for artists on the East Coast and the West Coast. Like, I'll mention records to some of my West Coast friends, and they'll be like, don't know it. I'm like, how is this possible that you don't know this? This is fantastic. How are you unfamiliar with the work of M.O.P.? They're like, they're from Queens? Yeah, that's why. Oh, okay. And same with the West Coast. And I guess that explains why I never really sort of acquainted myself previously with the music of People Under the Stairs, and how I, as the kids would say, slept on it was beyond me. But nevertheless, I've made a happy discovery and have been diving into their music ever since, and it's been really, really cool. But I'm still left with that whole, how did I miss this sensation when I come across their music? Similar thing happened. You ever have this happen to you with food? Like, I thought I had tried everything. I mean, I'm not a super worldly individual, but, I went to an international school, which meant I had lots of kids that I grew up with who were from all over the world, meaning, you go over to somebody else's house for a sleepover and you'd eat a different type of food than what you'd been raised with. It was a really kind of cool way to grow up. And I thought I'd eaten everything, and everything that I hadn't eaten, I thought it was because I decided not to eat it. Certain types of organ meat, and I'll take a big passeroo on. Certain types of, bug-related delicacies are not for me. But I thought I'd eaten everything. So, when I discovered the Pannkuchen, I was out of my mind by the fact that I had never run across this in my entire life. And I don't know if you've ever had one of these. There's these Pannkuchen restaurants. I think they exist primarily in the Midwest. I don't know if they're open anymore. I haven't been back to that area in a little while, but Pannkuchen is indescribably delicious. Have you ever had it? Now, what's interesting is I've talked to other people about this, and there's not too many foods that people don't know about. My two big discoveries of the last couple of years, I suppose, were soup dumplings, those incredible dumplings where they cook the soup inside of them, and then the Pannkuchen. And when I brought soup dumplings and pannekuchen up to other people, they've been like, no, I never had that. Wait, the soup is in the dumplings? And what is a pannekuchen? And a pannekuchen, oh my gosh, if you get a chance to try one, please take it. A pannekuchen it's sort of a thicker, eggy pancake. That's kind of a Dutch tradition called the Dutch baby. And on top of the Dutch baby, there's whatever topping you choose to put on it. But my favorite is the apple pannekuchen. And the apple pannekuchen tends to be, well, it's like this giant pancake with sugary apples on top of it with butter and brown sugar crusted as it cooks in a big iron skillet of a pan. It's a magical thing, and it brought me closer to a man that we lost this past week just gone by.
Real radio.
104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So my question for you earlier is, have you ever tried a pannekuchen? Like I said, a pannekuchen is just unreal. So delicious. And it's one of those things where, man, I was shocked that I'd never run across it before in my life. Been around a little bit, lived in different parts of the world, had friends from all over the world, and, thought I'd experience every form of cuisine. Certainly every sort of like pancake-related offshoot that it's possible to have. I mean, I grew up in England. When you go and have pancakes in England and they bring you a thin little crepe with lemon and sugar, you go, well, this is different, and also not as good as maple syrup and butter, but different and good nevertheless. And everybody has their own sort of take on this situation, whether it be a potato pancake, whether it be some sort of crepe, whether it be whatever the hell it is. I thought I had tried them all until I tried the pannekuchen. Now, like I said, I don't know if you've ever given a pannekuchen a go. And if you are listening to this going, of course I've tried a pannekuchen, you imbecile, why would you bring this up? The only reason I bring it up is because I'd never had one until a few years ago when I, by chance, went into one of those pannekuchen restaurants in the Midwest. And man, I'd never had anything like it before. And when I bring it up to other people outside of the Midwest, they don't know about it. In places like Wisconsin and Minnesota and places like that, where I suppose there's many people of Dutch and Scandinavian origin, as is the tradition. Oh, you know what the other sort of like Midwestern pancake thing I've tried is that I'd never tried up until a few years ago? You ever had lefse? Lefse is sort of this like Christmas type of thing. It's a Scandinavian tradition that a lot of people in the Midwest have carried over, where it's sort of like, it's, I guess, a very thin potato pancake. It's sort of potato flour rolled out onto this thing where you cook it, and they have special sort of like flying saucer sled sized cookers for these things, massive circular plates that you roll out the potatoey lefse dough onto, and then you have a special lefse turning stick that you use, and it's sort of like this very thin potatoey crepe, and on it you put, well, mostly sort of like white sugar and butter, which sounds really weird. Potatoes with white sugar and butter in pancake form. Odd, but also oddly delicious. And another thing that I'd never tried before. But the pannekuchen was an absolute revelation because it's just so good. Like I said, it's this sort of like thicker, slightly eggier in consistency pancake called the Dutch baby, which gets cooked in an iron skillet. And it's deeper and it's thicker and it's more dense. And on top of it, they put a couple different things. I think you can even get savory pannekuchen, but there's this version of pannekuchen that is something that, man, if I was on death row and had my last meal options being planned out for me, pannekuchen would be on it. And it's sort of like this Dutch baby pancake in an iron skillet with chopped up apples on top. And the apples are in sort of like an apple pie filling type brown sugar mixture, which is crystallized after being cooked in the skillet inside the oven with some butter on top. And it's okay. It's so good. It's so good. And like I said, it's one of my absolute favorite foods ever. And, well, we were talking earlier about my love of hip hop and the fact that that sort of music was everything to me back in the day, which is why Beastie Boys are my favorite band ever, of all time, ever, without even having to think about it. So when Beastie Boys came out with the lyric to one of my favorite songs, Super Disco Breakin', and the The line was, sometimes I am loud, sometimes I'm soft-spoken, and when I'm in Holland, I eat the Panacoken. I was like, oh, Beastie Boys like Panacoken too. This is awesome. This is so cool. When I finally put it together what Panacoken was, I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And then, I don't know if you ever saw this episode. I don't know if you ever saw this episode of Anthony Bourdain's show, but he was in Holland. And he was at this restaurant, and he was talking about it. And he said, this is where the Beastie Boys were inspired to write the lyric, when I am in Holland, I eat the Panacoken. And he said, this is a lyric I've had tattooed on my inner thigh since the release of Super Disco Breakin'. And I'd always loved what Anthony Bourdain did. Thought he was super cool. I had so much, I was just fascinated by everything that he did. Because he believed in going out into the world, and he believed in getting to know people better. And I think he believed in fostering peace and change through conversation and eating. And he did it in a way that, well, the man seemed almost incapable of BS. And so I always loved his show. Well, his various shows. But when I heard that line, when I heard, this is where the Beastie Boys were inspired to write the lyric, when I'm in Holland, I eat the Panacoken, which is a lyric I've had tattooed on my inner thigh since the release of Super Disco Breakin'. Immediately, the guy in my mind became a bit of a kindred spirit. Panacoken, Beastie Boys, and going after the things that you want in life. This is an inspiring individual. And that line sort of summed it up. This is a guy who was so unbelievably good at living. He was so unbelievably good at living. Now, if you're a broadcaster, you know what I'm talking about. And this is kind of inside baseball, but every broadcaster I know wishes they were Anthony Bourdain. Every broadcaster I know wishes they were this guy, this uncompromising guy who got to travel the world, write his own rules, create his own content, not have to rely on Metallica or the Red Hot Chili Peppers putting out a good record to predicate their own success on. No, this was something that he did completely himself, of his own invention and on his own steam, under his own steam. He got to travel the world, he got to talk to people, and it was all because he made a decision to do it and went ahead and did it. And for that reason, he was an incredibly, incredibly inspiring guy. Not only to people in general, but especially those of us that make our living in broadcasting. And like I said, it's so unbelievably sad to me that someone who is so good at living decided not to.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radioland.
All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on, come on.
So if you are like me, you always admired and looked up to Anthony Bourdain. And like I was saying, especially for journalists, especially for broadcasters, we all just wanted to be that guy. I mean, this is a little bit inside baseball, but this thing that we all do, we're all incredibly fortunate to do it. Those of us that get to be on the radio get to be a part of a community. This is the greatest part of my day. The time I spend on the radio is the best part of my day every single day. And the idea that I get to share music and laughs and conversation on any one of the radio stations I'm on with people, that I get to become a part of people's afternoons, that maybe if they're having a lousy commute home, I can share something with them that makes them smile, makes it easier to take going nowhere and nowhere quickly as they fight traffic. It's an awesome thing. Being part of a community is an incredible thing. Knowing you made a difference, however tiny it might be in someone's lives, is an incredible thing and something I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do. That's the real win in radio, is I think leaving the world a little bit better than you find it every single day by maybe giving someone a reason to smile. And that's great, and that's incredibly rewarding. However, with that, with the privilege of doing that, there comes certain constraints. There comes things like program directors saying like, hey, I know we had you talking for 45 seconds. I'm going to need you to chop that down to 35 seconds. And I'm not speaking about me. I've been very fortunate to have some program directors that had a little vision and were able to take the restrictors off and, for the most part, let me do what the hell I'm going to do. I'm fortunate enough to have worked with a bunch of folks that said, hey, you're talented, do what you do, walk right up to the line, and when we need to pull you back, we will. And that's been lucky. But, there are just certain restrictions, certain things that you have to do, certain things that you have to put up with. There are certain parts of your success that are predicated on other people's work. If the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Metallica don't come with a good album, your ratings are going to sink. And, well, then you won't hit your bonus, and then you won't be able to afford to pay your rent and your car payment and all the above. And so it's a weird one. It's a weird one having a career in broadcasting because on the one hand, you're hired to be yourself. On the other hand, you are at the mercy of others in a lot of ways. I'm just speaking in broad terms. This is not for everyone. And the longer I go on, the less I have to deal with this sort of thing. And that's been really nice. But we've all had to take it. We've all had to deal with it. We've all had to put up with it. So all of us in broadcasting look at a guy like Anthony Bourdain and go, here is a man in his world, a world of his own creation. Something that came from his mind. Something that came from his mind that he wrote down that touched people's lives, that turned into a book, that turned into speaking engagements, that turned into magazine articles, that turned into numerous television shows, that turned into television shows unlike things that you'd ever seen before. A man traveling the world, making the world smaller. A man incapable of BS. A man whose unique vision of the world was something that was so appealing to all of us that it brought him tremendous amounts of success. And seemingly tremendous amounts of happiness, too. We all looked at this guy and went, he is 100 million% got it made. And you know what? We don't know him. But from the outside looking in, you have this dude that is incredibly good at living life on his own terms and who has created a career for himself where he does the things that he enjoys. He travels, he writes, he eats, he meets people, he talks to people, he learns about people and humanity. And he seemed happy. Maybe happy takes it a little too far, but he seemed like he got genuine pleasure out of the work that he did and the world that he created for himself. And for that reason, I suppose, this one was exceptionally difficult to understand. Like I said, it's so unbelievably sad to me that someone who's so good at living decided not to. I got a message from someone after he passed away saying, I'm actually angry about this. I struggle with sadness myself. And this man who is someone that as I approach 50, I could still look at for inspiration. He was so good at it. And you know what? I think that's it. This is why this is an extremely tough one to accept. Not just because we were fans of Anthony Bourdain, or not just because he was living a life that so many of us would want. He was a constant source of inspiration to me and so many others in the world of writing, creating, broadcasting, whatever you want to call it. The life he created for himself, the way he went through the world, the creativity that he had, and he also had an outlet for. And that's a big one. If you're a creative person that's not creating, I don't care if you're writing a song, I don't care if you're sketching a sketch, I don't care if you're writing a short story or an essay that no one will ever read. If you are a creative person that's not creating, if you don't have an outlet for that, there's almost no way you're going to be happy. So not only did he have so much creativity, he had a genuine outlet for it. But the creativity, the compassion for others, the interest that he had in his fellow human beings. All of this was so rich and so full. And Anthony Bourdain seemed to genuinely get so much out of it. So his passing goes way beyond the, gee, he had it all, why would he do that sentiment that people default to in this situation. The sadness that we felt for someone like Chris Cornell, who wrote so many parts of the soundtrack to our lives, or Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, who had also written the soundtrack to our lives, who was also the voice of a generation. It was horrifying when they decided they no longer wanted to be part of this life. But also, when you look back on their artistic output, and this is one of the things that makes it that much more difficult and that much more tragic, especially I would imagine for the people that were close to them, their life's work basically reads like a cry for help. You understood that they were really going through something, and really going through something difficult most of the days they were on this earth. You listen to the music of Soundgarden, you listen to songs like Fell on Black Days. You listen to Linkin Park songs like Shadow of the Day or One Step Closer. And I'm not saying it makes sense, but you are less surprised, I suppose, as harsh as that may sound, you are less surprised than when you found out that a man like Anthony Bourdain, who, like I said, had a life so rich and so full, and a life that he so genuinely seemed to get so much out of, that it makes his passing go beyond the, gee, he had it all, why would he do that sentiment that people default to in this situation. And I think that's why his passing is not only incredibly sad, but also incredibly confusing. And because it's that much more confusing and that much more difficult to comprehend, that makes it scarier to us personally. Now, there are all sorts of people that have said, I hope you talk about this on the air, and I hope you don't forget to say that veterans are taking their lives every day at an alarming rate, and that is absolutely true. And there are a lot of people who say things to me like, wow, all these servicemen decide to end it all, and nobody blinks an eye. And a television host does the same thing, and the entire world loses its mind. They're willing to lay down their lives to protect our freedom. He traveled the world and wasn't someone who served us as much as our military did. And I find that sort of talk to be incredibly damaging, because it's not like you're only worth something if you are a public servant, if you are a first responder, if you are a member of our military, if you are anybody that puts your life on the line so that other people may live theirs. Of course, you deserve the utmost of respect. And of course, our government needs to do something meaningful to intervene in the lives of our veterans that are troubled after they get out of the service of our country. That is a huge problem, and one that we've addressed many times on this show. But to those people that had written me, hey, amazing how nobody bats an eye when a serviceman ends his life, and this guy does, and the entire world loses their mind. I understand that sentiment, but there's a reason why a guy like Anthony Bourdain affects us in this way. Because when he's talking about himself, when he's writing about himself, he's holding up a mirror. We are emotionally connecting to life through him. And like I said, that's what makes it that much scarier. We don't understand it. We've related to him so strongly, his voice, his points of view, the things that he had to say about the world and how we as humans make our way in it. We've related so strongly to it for so long that in some ways we see a piece of ourself in him. We don't see a piece of ourselves in soldiers, because soldiers are not us. Soldiers are unbelievably brave. Soldiers are a different breed. Soldiers are someone to be put absolutely on a pedestal for their bravery. Soldiers are someone that we need to do something meaningful for. Our government isn't doing it, so everything that we can do to look after them when they get out of the service, we must do. Let's not get this confused. But, like I said, when a guy like Anthony Bourdain does what he does and does it well, he holds up a mirror in talking about himself and giving us his impression of the world. We are discovering and revealing new things about who we are. And for that reason, it's why his death is that much more confusing, because it's that much harder to understand, because we've seen so much of ourselves and who we are in his words and his actions. That's what makes this one a little scarier. Said it before, I'll say it again. It's so unbelievably sad to me that someone who is so good at living life decided not to. The mirror that he held up was, for many of us, showing us the life that we could be living, or should be living, or want to be living. The idea of seeing the world, the idea of meeting other people, the idea of bringing people together through culture and understanding, and just eating good food and having great conversation. All something that we relate to, all something that we wish we had done a little bit more of, or could do a little bit more of. Plus, we're really, really, really going to miss his work. And so, I'd like to say thank you and good night to Anthony Bourdain. There's a lot more to talk about this week. There's been a lot going on. I've been away for a week or so working on an outside project, and, well, for that reason, you and I have a lot of catching up to do. But I wanted to finish this part of the show by saying that you, me, every last one of us, we can all help prevent suicide. 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. That's the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now, in case you didn't know, the Lifeline provides 24/7 free and confidential support for anyone in distress. They provide prevention and crisis resources for you, should you need it, or your loved ones, or someone you know. 1-800-273-8255. We can all help prevent suicide. Thank you so much.
Sometimes you just know you're done. You're longing for that shining sun. You walk these streets most every day. You're waiting to get washed away. Radio.
Now, more AD on the radio.
Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you my musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD, and can't nobody rock a body better than me. Back once again, the ill behavior, delivering and giving you a musical savior. Back once again, it's your boy AD, and can't nobody rock a body better than me.
So, you know, it's interesting. You and I have talked about it a lot. We had Chuck D on the show to talk about it. Chuck D from Public Enemy and Prophets of Rage came on the show, and I don't know if you remember this. Well, the one big takeaway from our hanging out with Chuck D was the idea that the best thing anyone could do for themselves in 2018 is get a passport. I was like, what's one piece of advice you would give a young person? He was like, give a passport, get a passport, get out in the world, experience it, meet some people that aren't like you. You know, that was one of the reasons we got so much out of talking to musicians and entertainers in the run-up to the election. I don't know if you remember it. We did this whole punk rock politics segment and a series of interviews, and we got a lot out of talking to entertainers and a lot of people like what do entertainers have to say? They lead these charmed lives where they're not really living, the day in, day out set of responsibilities that all of us are. And that's true. They're not. But they have a life that requires them to, look, you and I call it a day in, day out sense of slog and responsibility that we deal with on a regular basis. But the thing that you have to do when you are a musician of any stature, and sometimes of not very much stature, is go out on the road, take it to the people. You got to go on tour. And sometimes your mortgage payments depend on it. You don't want to be away from your wife, your kid, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your dog, your cat for any length of time. But if you want to be able to pay the bills and continue to support the wife, the kid, the husband, the wife, the whoever it is, the dog, the cat, all of the above, you got to huck it out on the road and take it to the people. And when you take it to the people, you are literally doing that, and you are meeting the people. You're going different places. You're doing different things. You're seeing people that are different than you. You're meeting folks that think differently than you. And that's an incredibly valuable thing. We talked about this a lot on the show. Like I said, with Chuck D, it came up specifically when he said, get a passport. Because it's so important to get out in the world and meet people, experience things for ourselves. Now, sadly, travel is something of a luxury, and it's not necessarily a financial luxury. It can definitely be that, but I think for most Americans, it's a luxury of time. Everybody's working really hard. Everybody's working 2-3 jobs to, just sort of like stay on an even keel fiscally and be able to support people and do things. In much the same way a musician is obligated to leave the house to pay for life, we can never really sort of get outside of our 5 square mile bubble, our commute, our home, our office, our commute, back to home again. And that's our life for a lot of people. And then you collapse on the weekend and spend it face down in the living room carpet, not even leaving the sanctity of your home, and who could blame you? But it makes travel a bit of a luxury, and not so much a fiscal luxury, but a luxury of time. And that's a damaging thing. And I'm not saying you have to be a world traveler. If you like being where you need to be, great. But getting out into the world is an incredibly valuable thing. And, well, that totally makes sense to me because, look, I'm one of those people that's working a lot. I see the inside of the studio more than anything else. I've got a studio at work, I've got a studio at home, and I'm in the car. And there it pretty much ends. And then on the weekend, I spend a lot of the weekend working, and I collapse into the carpet the rest of the time that I'm not working. Whenever I get to do something like I did this past week just gone by, it's a tremendous reminder to me that there's real value in seeing things that you have not seen before. This past week just gone by, I had to take some time out to go be a part of this sort of festival that we were putting on called Camp Kona at a venue in Santa Fe, New Mexico called Meow Wolf. Now, there's something different that seems to happen in the desert. It fosters a different type of person. It fosters a different type of thinking. I don't know whether it's the fact that the horizon is what it is, the sunsets are what they are, that you look out into this thing where you can see all the way from one end of the horizon to the other end of the horizon, unobstructed by tall buildings, and it gives you a sense of infinite possibility and what's out there, and maybe that makes you feel small in the world, or maybe makes you feel like you've got to go out and figure out what's in the world. I don't know what it is about the desert, but it makes people think differently. And that's why it makes sense that there's this venue, Meow Wolf, out there. Meow Wolf is unlike anything I've ever seen. And I was a guy in a rock band. I have seen the inside of a lot of venues. It was my professional obligation for a very long time. Meow Wolf is this place where you walk in, and I suppose some people might say it's sort of like a miniature Burning Man. I've never been a burner, so I do not know. But you walk in and you are immediately struck by what you see. I just couldn't believe it. I was like expecting a venue, and there's all these different art installations all over the place. You can check out my Twitter and Facebook and Instagram feeds. I tried to give an impression of what it's like. And it really is one of those things that absolutely defies description. There's no real accurate way to capture the experience in words or even put pictures of attending it. You just kind of got to see it for yourself. But you walk in and there's all these different interactive art installations, amazing for an adult, amazing for a kid. But there's situations like a faux setup of the suburban home. Not long after you enter the venue, you can walk into what looks like Anytown America's suburban kitchen. But you open the fridge, and inside the fridge, there's a tunnel. And it feels a little daunting walking into the fridge because you've been told to stay out of fridges as a kid because that can be very dangerous. Yet you walk into this fridge and you go through a tunnel and you wind up in what could only be described as an airport in space, because all of a sudden you're on a vacation on a faraway planet with aliens that you can talk to and pet. And like I said, it's a very hard thing to describe. You kind of got to see it yourself. There's a tree house that you can walk through. There is an old school arcade. It's incredibly surreal. It's almost like what it would be like if Salvador Dali set up a venue, I suppose. But it is just an amazing experience. And, well, as you can imagine, the type of people that congregate in a place like that, they're a little different too. Maybe they're into some different stuff than you've been exposed to, or at least I've been exposed to. And then there was this band that played called Itch.io, who are one of the most incredible things I've ever seen. And again, they defy explanation. You really have to see them to believe them. But my best attempt at describing them is sort of like industrial metal / performance art a la Rammstein, mixed with one of the most incredible drum lines you've ever heard and Mexican luchador masked wrestling. And like I said, sort of defies description, something that you really have to see to understand. One of the most incredible performances I've ever witnessed in my entire life. And bear in mind, as a guy that's been in radio and a guy that has been in a rock band for years and years, I've seen a lot of different artists play, and this was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And seeing things that I hadn't seen before, such a great reminder to me that it's so important and so enriching for all of us to experience that which we are not. And I know this because of how you, how me, how all of us are feeling in America right now. We'll get into that next.
Leave the stimulation to the professionals.
Everyone is so smart.
KPRC, more stimulating talk radio.
There's something happening here, and you should know what it is. The dumbing up of America. Now, more AD on the radio.
So like I said, I had to kind of get out of the day in, day out bubble this past week just gone by and head to Santa Fe, New Mexico for this thing that we were putting on called Camp Kona that went down at a venue called Meow Wolf, a truly unique venue called Meow Wolf in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Sort of like a miniature Burning Man, I've heard it described as by people that have been to Burning Man. I'm not a burner. I couldn't attest to the validity of that statement, but it's really out there and very kind of interesting. And we talked about it a bit before. Please check out the photos on my Twitter and Instagram at ADSXE for both of those, because it really is something. And if you get a chance to go, please take it. And we saw this band Itch.io that we had on the bill. Again, they defy description. My best attempt at describing them would say that they're something akin to weird metal performance art a la Rammstein meets Mexican masked wrestling meets one of the best drum lines you've ever heard. And it was one of the greatest shows I have ever seen. So freaking cool. But my time there reminded me of a few things. First and foremost, how great it was to see things that I've never seen before. How great it was to try something that I've never tried before. Seeing this band, being at this venue, all things that I'd never tried. And I got to tell you, I'm somewhat cynical. I've been in a band forever. I've been in the radio business forever. And you see the inside of a lot of venues as a result of that. Some nice, some absolute hellholes. And when someone says, man, you won't believe this venue, you're just like, save it. Like I said, a little cynical. So had I not had to go there for work, I might not have been privy to this incredible experience, or these incredible experiences, the like of which I have never had before. The other thing that happened to me was I was stuck in a hotel room for a certain amount of time, and I was watching a whole bunch of stuff about Anthony Bourdain on CNN. And, well, left the TV on, went to shower, came out, and CNN was back into their regular programming. And this was during the time where it was Donald Trump at the summit, and there was that photo. 2 different versions of it had been released that told 2 different stories. And we get it. This is a this is something that can be over and done with very quickly. Well, if you look at Angela Merkel's version of the photo, it presents the rest of the members of the summit ganging up on Trump and Trump looking insecure. And if you look at somebody else's version of the photo, it makes Trump look like he's holding court and everybody's very interested in what he has to say. End of story. But man, because of the 24-hour news cycle, and the need to fill news 24 hours a day, they spent forever talking about this photo, or these two versions of this photo. Very simple, like a kindergarten class could have grasped the concept. Hey, two different versions of the same scene can tell very different stories. What did we learn from this? We learned that you really have to be there and experience it. Okay, great. But the amount of viewers' lives that they frittered away discussing the ins and outs of these two versions of the same scene presented in two different photos was like, oh my gosh. And I realized I'd been sucked in. I was like, I've been watching this for how long? This is how much of my life I'm never getting back. And I don't watch a lot of cable news. I just don't find it to be useful or productive. But these two experiences, me getting out into the world and then me seeing how the world kind of informs itself and how different and opposing these two things were a real reminder to me that we need to get out there a little bit more. I need to get out there. We as a nation would do well to encounter things face to face. They don't even have to be different and exotic and things that you've never experienced before, but making your own impression, coming to your own conclusion. So important, because I like I said, I don't experience cable news all that much. I don't choose to watch it. But I know lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people do. The ratings are off the charts. Millions upon millions of people are watching this. And that means a lot of people in this day and age where we're not able to get out into the world are forming their worldview on, I'm not even going to get into the biased politics of the different cable news networks, but they're forming their worldview based on somebody else's impression. That's been spun into a news story that is needlessly protracted because they got to fill the 24-hour news cycle. And it just struck me like, this is not the way to do things. We need to experience things for ourselves. We need to have the visceral contact with other people and life and not get so bogged down in our workaday existences that we don't get out there. Because allowing anyone, whether it's your best friend or a cable news network, to form your view of the world for you is just a very dangerous and foolhardy proposition, I think. And I was reminded of how much there was out there that I didn't know or didn't understand. As you would imagine, these folks at Meow Wolf were different sorts of people. The people that know about this stuff before the rest of us do. They're looking for different things, perhaps, than we are. And I'm sounding like a complete fuddy-duddy at this stage in the game. Which is weird as somebody that works in rock radio, that's made his living on the fringes and counterculture areas of the world. Metal, hardcore, punk rock. These were all my things. Art, music, things of that nature. This is what's always floated my creative boat, and this is what makes up my daily existence. But there's still whole massive levels of things that I don't fully understand, and because I'm stuck in this sort of like day in, day out existence where, I'm looking at numbers trying to figure out which Metallica or Red Hot Chili Peppers song is going to make iHeartRadio more money when I play it. It takes away from some of that. And man, it's really important to meet people and talk to people. I was lucky enough that part of my job, again, I should have just done this. I should have just gone and traveled, whether it was part of my job or not. And I should have just talked to people, whether it was part of my job or not. But I talked to people as part of my job. It's my job to kind of go speak to folks and see what they thought of the whole shindig and capture some of that for later broadcasts. And when you speak to folks, you realize that, okay, they have lived a completely different existence to anything that I fully understand. They've lived in a different part of the world. They do a different thing for a living. They look for different things in their lives. Different things float their boats. They have different ways of celebrating, of commiserating, of doing all these things. And I spoke to these people that were out of their mind, delirious, having just come out of a show, being shaken by having seen something unlike they'd ever seen before, and then just gave me these incredibly beautifully articulate and also somewhat out there descriptions of what it was they'd seen and why they liked it. And it just blew my ever-loving mind. Talking to folks, going, man, getting out there, getting out of the house and talking to people. Oh my gosh, it's such a game changer. And this is something that I preach on the show. It's important to get out. It's important to meet people that are different than you. It's important to do all these things. And I realized I hadn't necessarily been practicing what I preach, because you get stuck, but you see that it's so unbelievably valuable. It opens up your mind. It opens up your heart. It opens up your senses, and it unshackles your thinking from the controlling influences of, and I'm going to sound like a crazy out there conspiracy theorist now, but it unshackles your thinking from the crazy controlling influences of just kind of traditional news outlets. And I'm not saying they're evil, controlling people. I'm saying that they're in it to make a buck, and they got to figure out a way to do that. And, well, the way they do that has, I think, wound up stunting our thinking somewhat. And it's perfectly within all of our power to get out there, do some stuff we've never done before, and talk to some people we've never talked to before, but we're doing that less and less. Well, I hope we do that more. That seems to be the sense. That seems to be how you're feeling and how I'm feeling and how we're all feeling. Only because, I don't know if you caught it or not, a new poll confirms something that you really didn't need a poll to confirm. You're sick and tired of the news. According to the Pew Research Center, 68% of Americans have what they're calling news fatigue. This has been all over the news. Like, news outlets have been reporting this, and they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot. They're like, and in the news, you're sick of us. But according to the Pew Research Center, almost all of us have news fatigue. Conservatives have more burnout than liberals, which makes sense since so much of the news these days is anti-Trump. But people are fed up on both sides. Among people who lean right, 77% they feel news fatigue. On the left, it's 61%. Surprisingly, about half of America says that the news media does a fairly good job of keeping the public informed. 17% say they're doing very well, and 24% think they're not doing well at all. But bottom line is, we are sick of it. We're sick of the news. And it would behoove every last one of us to turn off the news, to stop allowing other things to inform our thinking. And that was one of the great tragedies of Anthony Bourdain going away. Anthony Bourdain was a guy who, well, believed in exactly what we're talking about and found a way to practice that, to get out into the world, to eat food that he'd never eaten before, to meet people that he'd never met before, find out what it was that made them tick, find out what it was that made them happy. And in doing so, made the world a better and more peaceful place. And by putting it on TV, even more so. And we live in this day and age where the enormity of the craziness seems insurmountable. Whether you love or despise President Trump, the vast majority of the world would agree that he is not necessarily a cool-headed individual. And having him sit down to talk about what could ostensibly be the fate of the world with a guy who is a maniacal dictator, Kim Jong-un, this does not make people feel confident in our futures. This makes people hold their breath. Forget whether or not you think it's the right or the wrong thing to do. It's one of those things where you go, this guy and this guy are going to sit down, and it could result in global Armageddon. Or if they manage to work things out, it could result in a big sigh of relief. And we can't do anything about it. It's in the hand of these two. These two? Oh! So it's really difficult to feel like you have any kind of sense of control over what's going on in the world and in your life, when it seems like the fate of the world is being decided by two people who are incapable of picking the right barber, let alone the right course of action in situations like the ones we're facing. But I'm telling you now, as I've told you time and time again on this show, get out there, experience life for yourself, form your own decisions. You don't need a politician. You don't need a preacher. You don't need a news outlet to tell you what's right and wrong. You know in your heart of hearts, you know where your moral compass's true north is. You know what's right and wrong. But it's easy to get stymied. It's easy to get complacent. It's easy to take a backseat. It's easy to forget that you have power and influence over your world. It's easy to forget that if you are going to get involved in politics, local politics are probably the ones that are going to impact your life the most. It's easy to forget that you, my friend, have the ability to wake up in the morning and write your own story and go through life in a way that informs you and lets you affect the people around you for the better if you want to. So get out there. Turn off the news, get out there, hang out, meet some people, eat some food that you maybe haven't necessarily eaten before, have a conversation about things that you haven't discussed before, and make the world a bit of a smaller, better place. That could be our lasting tribute to Anthony Bourdain. I think I'm going to make it mine.